What if I told you that the deepest addiction you've ever known is not to a substance, not to a person, not even to pleasure, but to an image? Not a photo, not a reflection in the mirror, but the invisible picture your mind carries every day of who you should be, who you must become, and what it would finally take for you to feel worthy of being seen. This quiet compulsion is the most socially accepted obsession, the addiction to becoming somebody. In a world that rewards performance over presence, appearance over authenticity, the hunger to be recognized, to be admired, praised, validated, has been woven into your bones since childhood. You were never simply allowed to be. You were subtly, repeatedly conditioned to perform, to become, to mold yourself into a version that would finally deserve love. You've seen it. The girl who starves herself for an ounce of admiration. The woman who burns herself out trying to be perfect, pleasant, powerful, all at once. The mother who loses her own identity inside a role she didn't choose, but learned to perform. These are not just stories. These are echoes of your own. There is a quiet pain beneath the surface of your smile, a longing not to become more, but to finally be free from the burden of becoming anything at all. Krishnamurti once said, "It is no measure of health to be well-adjusted to a profoundly sick society." But you were taught to adjust. You were trained, not unlike a dancer learning steps, to anticipate praise, avoid rejection, and find security in conformity. Your mind learned early that love was conditional, and so it built a mask. This mask is the ego, not just pride, not arrogance, but the entire structure of who you think you are, your name, your titles, your achievements, your failures, your traumas, your dreams, a collage of memory and projection. And like any mask, it hides as much as it reveals. But here is the dangerous part. When the ego becomes your identity, you become afraid to look beneath it. This fear is subtle but constant. It's the tension in your shoulders when someone questions you, the sting you feel when someone else shines, the anxiety of not being enough even when you've done everything they asked. You begin to live as a performance, always one step removed from yourself. And here lies the trap. The more you chase being someone, the further you drift from what you already are. You believe freedom lies ahead once you prove yourself, once you're recognized, once you're better. But that's the illusion. Because ego feeds on becoming. It cannot exist in stillness. It must keep moving, hungry, unsatisfied, comparing, grasping, or it dies. Yet something inside you longs to stop, to breathe, to be seen not as a role, a resume, a label, but as the trembling, sacred, beautiful presence you already are underneath it all. You may sense it in silence, those rare moments when you're alone, not trying to impress anyone, not trying to win or post or earn anything, when everything becomes quiet. In that stillness, there is no need to be anything other than aware. And yet the ego cannot survive here because it is made of noise. This addiction to becoming is not your fault, but it is your responsibility to observe it, not to fight it, not to shame it, but to see it clearly, without judgment. Because the moment you observe this movement, this craving to improve, impress, compare, the spell begins to weaken. You see the machinery of thought constructing identity, reinforcing self-image, dividing you from others, and you begin to understand that this self you've been trying to become is not real. What is real is the awareness observing it all, the awareness that is not fragmented, that doesn't belong to any label, role, or history. It is here, now, watching. You don't need to destroy the ego. You don't need to become enlightened. You simply need to see, with clarity, with honesty, with the full presence of your heart. And in that seeing, something begins to shift.
This shift does not arrive with fireworks or applause. It comes quietly, often painfully, like waking up from a long, vivid dream. At first, it disorients you. You may feel hollow, confused. The identity you once clung to, the achiever, the lover, the wounded, the fighter, begins to dissolve at the edges. Without that familiar outline, you ask, if I am not who I've always thought I was, then who am I? But that question, asked in stillness and not in fear, is the doorway. Krishnamurti spoke not of answers, but of insight, the flame of awareness that burns through illusion. And one of the deepest illusions is that you must constantly fix yourself. This belief that something is wrong with you unless you are improving is the foundation of an inner war that never ends. You dress it in language that sounds noble: self-growth, ambition, becoming your best self. But underneath it, something raw hides, a whisper that says, "You're not lovable yet." So you keep running, achieving, enhancing, chasing, not realizing that the chase itself is the suffering. The modern world feeds this suffering expertly. It packages ego as empowerment, telling women especially that to be worthy, they must be extraordinary. Flawless skin, powerful careers, unshakable confidence, perfect motherhood, eternal youth. It is a performance stitched together by fear and sold as freedom. But real freedom is not in what you become. It is in what you see through. Imagine the possibility that you do not need to be someone extraordinary to be loved. That love does not require achievement. That your worth is not negotiated through performance. Imagine this not as a concept, but as a living truth. Most cannot, because the ego trembles at the thought of being ordinary. To it, ordinariness is death. It says, if I'm not special, I'll be forgotten. If I'm not needed, I'll be abandoned. If I'm not admired, I'll be invisible. So you keep polishing your identity, hoping the reflection will finally smile back with approval. But the reflection is made of memory, of past wounds and future hopes, of borrowed ideals and inherited pain. It is never whole, and that's why it never satisfies. Only awareness is whole. To observe yourself in moments of insecurity, envy, loneliness, without running, without fixing, without narrating, is an act of quiet revolution. It breaks the trance. It says, I am here. I see the movement of thought. I see its fear, its clinging, its sorrow. But I am not caught in it. And slowly, something soft begins to return. A feeling you may have forgotten. The feeling of simply being alive, without needing to explain why. This is where love can begin. Not the love that demands or seduces or proves, but the love that is, simply because you are present and aware and no longer afraid to be no one at all. This is not passivity. It is not the death of strength. It is the death of false strength and the birth of something truer, something rooted not in defense, but in understanding. For the woman who has spent her life trying to be enough, this is not easy. To no longer strive to be desirable, to be praised, to be needed, can feel like disappearing. But in truth, you're only disappearing from the eyes of illusion. In the mirror of clarity, you're just beginning to appear. And what appears is not a role, not an identity, not a brand, but a presence, a deep, unshakable stillness, a clarity that sees through the masks, but holds no hatred toward them, that recognizes the ego as a frightened child, not a demon, and sits with it in compassion, not in battle. This is how healing begins, not by building a better self, but by no longer needing to.
There is a quiet rebellion in simply observing your mind, not as something to be conquered, but as something to be understood. In that observation, you stop pouring your energy into constructing who you should be and begin to notice who has always been here, beneath the noise. Thought, in its habitual motion, is always moving away from the present. It creates time, not the clock on the wall, but psychological time, the space between what is and what should be. It is in that space that suffering takes root. Because when you are constantly becoming, you are never arriving. When you are always improving, you are never enough. Krishnamurti called this the movement of becoming, and he saw it as the very core of inner conflict. Watch your thoughts, not in theory, but right now, wherever you are. Watch how they speak in whispers of comparison, judgment, memory. They say, "You should be more beautiful. You should have done better. One day you'll be enough." But who is this you that they are speaking to? Is it the true self, or the image that thought has built? You may find, as you look honestly, that this inner dialogue is never truly satisfied, that no matter how much you achieve, there is always another mountain, that no matter how much love you receive, there is still a corner of fear. What if it disappears? This is the very structure of the ego. It thrives on dissatisfaction. It must keep searching because its existence depends on movement, on becoming. It is terrified of stillness because stillness reveals its illusion. And yet, the deepest truths are revealed only in stillness. Not the stillness of inaction, but the stillness of the mind that is fully attentive. A mind that watches, moment by moment, without wanting, without resisting. It is here, in this stillness, that the addiction to becoming begins to unravel. You begin to see that the person you've been trying to become was never real, only a projection built by fear and longing. This realization can shake you. You may grieve the loss of that imagined self. You may feel vulnerable, exposed. But this is not the death of you, it is the death of a prison. There is no self to improve, only a mind to understand. And when you see clearly, you stop trying to escape yourself. You stop needing to be desirable, successful, perfect, because you recognize that those were never the conditions for love. They were the demands of a world addicted to surfaces. The feminine spirit in its essence does not thrive through striving, but through receptivity, insight, and deep attention. Not passive, not weak, but powerful in a way the ego can never be, because it does not seek power over others, but alignment with truth. When you return to this place, not through effort, but through presence, you begin to feel whole, even in your imperfections. You begin to trust life again, not because it always gives you what you want, but because you are no longer using life to prove something.
You may find that relationships begin to shift. You no longer attract those who feed your insecurity because you are no longer feeding it yourself. You no longer tolerate shallow praise because you are no longer starving for it. You begin to speak not to impress, but to connect, to listen, not to respond, but to understand. This is not a spiritual fantasy, it is a profound psychological reality, and it begins with one radical act: the willingness to look at yourself not through the lens of who you are becoming, but through the quiet truth of who you already are. Not the name, not the story, not the wound, but the awareness itself. This awareness is not yours or mine. It is not personal. It does not belong to time. It is simply the light that sees, and in seeing, transforms. You do not need to become somebody. You only need to wake up from the illusion that you ever weren't.
As you awaken from the illusion of becoming, a strange silence begins to fill the spaces that used to be crowded by self-doubt, ambition, and comparison. It is not the silence of emptiness, but of clarity, a deep, luminous quiet in which all things can be seen for what they are, without distortion, without resistance. This silence is not something you create. It is what remains when thought is no longer scrambling to protect an identity. When the noise of the me, the person you think you are or must be, fades into the background. In that space, there is no becoming, there is only being. And yet the world around you keeps shouting, be more, do more, stand out, build your brand, achieve. These voices are persistent, and they will call to you. But the difference now is that you hear them as voices, not as truth. And in that subtle shift, there is tremendous power. You may notice how many of your choices were driven by fear of insignificance. How often you said yes when you wanted to say no because you feared being unseen. How you smiled when your heart was aching because you thought vulnerability was weakness. How many dreams you pursued, not because they were yours, but because someone else would approve. To see this is not to blame yourself, it is to reclaim your energy from illusion. There is a kind of spiritual maturity that arises when you no longer need to decorate the false self. You do not shame it, nor do you glorify it. You simply recognize it was a vehicle for survival, a necessary fiction for a world that could not always hold your truth. But the time for performance is over. The time for presence has come. This is not easy. For the woman raised to be everything, beautiful, competent, self-sacrificing, desirable, peeling off the masks feels like peeling off skin. Who are you without the roles? The seductress, the achiever, the caregiver, the muse? But ask yourself, who were you before you knew what others wanted from you? In the stillness of that question, something ancient stirs. Not an answer, but a presence. A way of being that doesn't arise from thought, but from deep attention. This is the feminine not as culture has twisted it, soft, submissive, decorative, but as it truly is, intuitive, spacious, deeply aware. Krishnamurti often spoke of the ending of psychological time, the inner movement of trying to become something other than what is. He wasn't advocating laziness or apathy. He was pointing to a state where the mind is no longer fragmented, where there is no internal conflict, no pursuit, no self to improve, only what is seen clearly, with a heart that no longer flees or clings. To live like this is to live in truth. You may still play roles in the world. You may still build, love, create, but you are no longer identified with the role. You do not derive your worth from it, and that gives you freedom. Because what can be taken from you when you are not attached to the image? You are no longer trying to be good enough. You are no longer seduced by recognition. You do not need to impress, seduce, or convince. You simply are, fully, honestly, lovingly. And in that wholeness, there is nothing to defend.
This is where the deepest connection arises, not when two people exchange performances, but when they meet without masks. When you look at another not through the lens of what they can give you or how they reflect upon your image, but simply as they are, vulnerable, complex, human. You may weep here because for the first time you were truly seen, not as someone extraordinary, but as someone real. And what a relief to no longer carry the burden of becoming.
As the burden lifts, something unexpected may arise. Not euphoria, but a quiet grief. Grief for the years spent running, for the love you withheld from yourself, for the ways you twisted your own soul just to fit into someone else's idea of worth. This grief is sacred. Do not run from it. Let it burn through the illusions, through the armor, through the lies you were told and came to believe. That you were only as good as your beauty, that you had to earn rest, that silence meant weakness, that your softness made you small, that you were incomplete and that wholeness was somewhere out there, in a title, in a lover, in the reflection of admiring eyes. Feel it all. Let your breath deepen as the weight begins to dissolve. There is no healing without the full presence of your heart, and the heart can only open when you stop protecting your image. So many women are exhausted, not from doing too much, but from being someone they're not, performing the ideal daughter, the perfect partner, the powerful professional. All admirable, all empty when disconnected from the truth of being. You were never meant to be a product. You were never meant to live as a resume, a filtered post, or a flawless surface. These are images designed for survival in a culture obsessed with appearance, but they do not nourish the soul. They do not see you. And until you stop looking for yourself in those mirrors, you will remain a stranger to your own essence. Krishnamurti once said, "The constant assertion of belief is an indication of fear." In the same way, the constant assertion of identity is also an expression of fear. Fear of being nobody, fear of being unseen, fear of being unimportant. But it is only when you are willing to be nobody that you begin to discover something far greater. Presence. Presence is not charisma. It is not performance. It is not knowing what to say or having the perfect words. It is the quiet strength of being fully here, unguarded, unattached to outcomes. It is a depth that cannot be imitated, because it is born of self-knowing. In presence, there is no longer a future self to chase. There is no next level of worthiness. There is only this moment and the full attention you bring to it. You may notice how your relationships begin to transform. Some may fall away, not out of drama, but out of clarity. You no longer tolerate those who only see the version of you that was hungry to be chosen. You are not interested in being someone's fantasy. You are interested in being seen. And some may rise with you, friends, partners, even strangers who recognize in your stillness a mirror of their own truth. These are not attachments, but reflections. You do not need them to complete you. You meet them from fullness, not need. This is where love becomes possible. Not romantic illusion, not codependence, but love as presence, as understanding, as deep mutual recognition without demand. You are not asking to be rescued. You are not asking to be improved. You are simply meeting life as it is and yourself as you are. And in this meeting, the past no longer dictates your future. The wounds no longer define your worth. The image no longer dictates your choices. This is not a destination. It is a way of living. Every moment becomes an invitation to return, to attention, to truth, to yourself. Not the self that thought constructed, but the living, breathing presence that needs no name. There is nothing more powerful than a woman who no longer needs to be someone,
Because in that emptiness, something whole emerges, not built by thought, not authored by culture, but revealed by stillness. A woman who is free. In the very act of seeing the false as false and truth as truth, there is liberation.